Today, I want to yap about a slightly depressing but very important topic that I think needs more attention brought to it. Autistic people are at greater risk for post-traumatic stress disorders. They are at greater risk for traumatic experiences that could lead to post-traumatic stress disorders. For example, sexual victimization, abuse, bullying, etc., etc. And when you think about it, even briefly, it does make sense. Our nervous systems already react to the world differently, and for a lot of us, they are heightened. They are operating at 1,000 when maybe the average person's nervous system is at 100. And not only that, but trauma is relative, so this can make things that aren't necessarily traumatic for the average person extremely traumatic to an autistic person. Anyway, I found this excerpt that was posted by the Autistic Girls Network, and it says, "We are playing at the game of life without a copy of the rules, and almost universally, the result is a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We develop anxiety that feels ridiculous, hypervigilant, tedious and exhausting to everyone around us, but, in all fairness, is entirely formed and relevant and natural. We fully expect to be undercut, undermined, abandoned, ridiculed and traumatized, and more often than not, we are right." When we talk about autism and hypersensitivity and hyperreactivity to literally everything in the world, sometimes we get small people with really, really, really big feelings. And to me, for example, when I think back to my childhood and I think about some of the core messages that I got from my experiences or my traumas, for me, one of those main things was that my feelings were too much and that I was too much. So the message that got sent to my little brain at the time was, if you are yourself, people will leave you. If you just be yourself, you will be too much. People will leave you. They will not see you. They will not understand you. They will not hear you. And when we think about how this might apply to autistic people who are undiagnosed, say throughout childhood, as I was, you are put at such a heightened risk for being traumatized, right? Like, say you are having a meltdown, you are extremely overwhelmed, you are overstimulated, and the people around you don't understand that, and they don't understand what's going on. So you're just told, oh, you're being ridiculous, or you're too much, or you're dramatic, or whatever it may be. And how it's also very common for neurodivergent children to be written off as the bad kid or lazy, when it's really undiagnosed neurodivergency half of the time. When you think about all of the adverse experiences that autistic people are at a greater risk of facing, and also consider the characteristics of autism that might play into those experiences to make them more likely to happen, it is quite unfortunate, but also very enlightening. Depending on our childhood experiences, a very common trauma response can be fawning or people pleasing. I, for example, definitely became a people pleaser for years. I didn't know I was autistic. I didn't know what I was going through, but I knew that all of the things that really naturally came out of me were wrong and they were too much, so I needed to push them down because I learned that they were an inconvenience to the people around me and to the people who at the time were supposed to take care of me and acknowledge them. So when it came to life and the real world, I learned that everything I was had to be stifled, had to be pushed down, had to be covered. And I just needed to get really good at playing this game and really good at doing all of the things that I should be doing, because that's where I was praised, that's where I was acceptable, that's where I was not too much. And I know it's very common for a lot of us to become people pleasers and to kind of like take on these self-protective behaviors and characteristics, even if they're subconscious, which they usually are. When we think about autistic girls being at a greater risk for sexual victimization, we see that girls are often late diagnosed, undiagnosed, and misdiagnosed. So, A, not knowing that they're autistic more often than not. B, part of autism is kind of just struggling socially, right? Struggling with social cues, struggling in social situations. And many of us have that deep, deep desire to be accepted, to be seen, to be liked, because that isn't something that comes easy to us. When you take on people pleasing, or when you learn from traumatic experiences that your needs are not valid, that can become so, so, so dangerous in so many ways. Society has a problem in general when it comes to the gendered sexual script, when it comes to consent, when it comes to even just attaining a basic sex education in America. But adding trauma and autism and all of these other things into the mix makes autistic people, and specifically autistic women, very, very vulnerable. When I think about all the ways that I learned to suppress not only my needs, but my normal, natural bodily responses to things, I think that for most of my life, I could not even feel things. I could not even feel what I was truly feeling, because all I learned was to push it down, push it away. It's too much, it's not normal, it's weird, etc., etc. Something that I did for years in social situations was ignore all of my body's cues, just to avoid being a potential inconvenience to the people around me. And I'm talking needing to go to the bathroom or being hungry, to the point where I was literally like so unbelievably uncomfortable, but I would live with that discomfort over potentially inconveniencing someone any day. After my diagnosis was when I really started to notice all of these things, and it took me time to actually like tune in to what my body was feeling and needing and asking for, and responding to that. Even some of the most basic things that come with being autistic, like stimming when you're upset. One of the things that I do the most is rock and sway. I'm a rocker, okay? I do it when I'm happy, I do it when I'm sad. I I just do it all the time. It is probably the biggest stim that I engage in. But growing up, that, for example, I knew that it was something that I just couldn't do in public. I just knew that it was. I knew that it was weird or wrong. So I wouldn't let myself feel the things that my body felt and needed to do until I was away from people, and until I was alone, and until I felt that it was appropriate to do those things. Something that also comes to mind for me is the trauma that comes along with being just chronically misunderstood, especially when it comes to interactions with your caregivers as a child and situations that you may have been put into where you like truly were unable to advocate for yourself, or if you tried, it just wasn't heard. I, for example, had my run with the mental health field as a child, and I mean, I had at least a few therapists, and not a single one of them ever picked up on the fact that I could have been autistic as a child. It was written off as anxiety, and it was written off as depression, which are very, very often comorbid conditions for autistic people and are also very common in general. Looking back at my younger self, I feel for her so much, and I have so much compassion for all of the things that she put herself through in order to try and prove something to herself in order to make a point, in order to be liked, in order to try to blend and fit in, because it didn't work. And the only person and the only body that I was harming was my own. It's such a weird, weird way to go through the world knowing that like something is just not quite right. And you've always had that, like it's always been in there. This feeling that something is just not quite right. And you literally have no idea what it is if you're undiagnosed. And so you walk around as a child growing up with this idea that you are fundamentally flawed and broken, and that there's nothing you can really do about it. So you just have to keep playing this game that you're playing where you walk through the world confused and deeply uncomfortable, but you do the best that you can to like put on this face and mold yourself into anything that you can that just might pass through the hoops. Like it just might make you seem like you're not as much of a threat as you really are. Like, oh, that person is just a little weird, right? But that's all. Like that's fine. When the reality is that you are neurologically wired differently than the majority of the population. So, yeah, you're gonna feel weird and alien, and you're gonna feel rejected, and you're gonna feel broken, and like something is wrong with you. But just because you're different doesn't mean you're broken. And I wish that I knew that as a child. I wish that I knew what it was that led me to feel the way I feel and to experience the world the way that I did and do, because I will always experience it this way because I cannot change my brain. I really, really wish that I knew that, and I mean, I know it now, and when it comes to trauma, especially childhood trauma, but really all trauma, you have to know that you didn't deserve it. That is true. And it is not your fault. That is also true. But it is, unfortunately, your responsibility. And it sucks. It really, really sucks. But I think as neurodivergent people who have likely been very, very traumatized, the absolute least that we can do for ourselves is listen. The absolute least that we can do for ourselves is to acknowledge that and to try to work through it and to try to treat ourselves the way that we wish we would have been treated as children, or treat ourselves in ways that we wish we would have in the past had we known what we know now. Feel free to trauma dump in the comments. We can have a little chat about autism and trauma and all of these big, scary things that really do suck, but none of us are truly alone in any of them.